Hello all, welcome to Narayana IAS. This is Sureka Bhaskar presenting to you the Daily News Analysis. In today's discussion, we'll be discussing a number of topics from The Hindu and the Indian Express which are important and relevant for the UPSC CSE examination. So let us have a look into the topics. The first topic is Navy foils hijacking bid in the Arabian Sea. We'll be talking about Indian Navy's rescue operation from a hijacked ship off the Somalian coast in the Arabian Sea. Followed by that, this article is from The Hindu, page number 6, Drug War, where we'll be talking about the recent report on the antimicrobial resistance released by the Indian government. Following that, we have 5 of 6 accused in the parliament breach give not to undergo polygraph test. Here we'll be discussing about a recent security breach in the Lok Sabha, followed by which 5 of the 6 accused have accepted in order to give their polygraph test. And here we'll be discussing about the difference between the polygraph test as well as the narco test, as well as whether it is violative of the constitutional provisions of Article 20 and 21 respectively. Moving ahead, we'll talk about ISRO test fuel cell to potentially power space missions. So this article talks about a recent fuel cell technology of the ISRO, that is the polymer electrolyte membrane fuel cell technology in order to power space missions. And finally, we will be discussing HC permits a widow to terminate pregnancy, where the High Court has allowed a widow to terminate her 29 weeks of pregnancy. So the first news for the day is Navy foils hijacking bid in Arabian Sea, commandos rescue crew with 15 Indians. So this particular article talks about the recent rescue operations by the Indian Navy Commando of 15 crew members off the coast of Somalia, where the Liberian flagged vessel was subject to hijacking in the Arabian Sea. So here we will read about why this particular article is in news, what the hijacking is about, and we'll also deal with a larger aspect of India's maritime security. And here, Indian armed forces are very important, as we have the questions on security forces, especially like the CAPF. We had a question on home guards in 2023. So this particular topic becomes important. And we can map it to GS paper 3, role of non-state actors in creating challenges to internal security, and various security forces and agencies and their mandate becomes important. Moving forward, we have a previous year mains question asked in 2022 regarding the maritime security challenges in India and what are the organizational, technical and procedural initiatives which are taken to improve the same. So here maritime security becomes important, as well as their associated agencies become important. Moving on, here let's look at the news. The Indian Navy commandos had safely evacuated around 21 crew members from a Liberian flagged bulk carrier subjected to hijacking off the Somalian coast in the Arabian Sea. So what do you mean by Liberian flagged? It means this particular carrier, that is, it was a vessel registered in Liberia. So moving forward, if you look at the map, we see that this was a Somalian coast, and here you have the Arabian Sea, and this was where the ship, the hijacking had actually taken place. Okay. So now let us see a Liberian flagged bulk carrier MV Lila Norfolk. This was the name. It was hijacked by pirates off the Somalia's coast in the Arabian Sea, and the Indian Navy had received an alert from the UK Maritime Trade Operations, that is the UKMTO. Now let us understand about this particular agency, UKMTO. UKMTO is nothing but it is a maritime agency that essentially operates under the British Royal Navy. Also, it acts as a point of contact between the merchant vessel and the maritime security forces. It monitors all the maritime activities in key high-risk areas. What are these areas? These areas include the Arabian Sea, the Gulf of Arabia, the Red Sea, and the Gulf of Oman. So as we see, that is the Indian Navy Command, had received an alert from the UK Maritime Trade Operations, that is the UKMTO, which essentially operates under the British Royal Navy, and it is responsible for monitoring all the maritime activities in these high risk or the high key areas of risk like the Arabian Sea, Gulf of Arabia, Gulf of Oman, as well as the Red Sea. Moving ahead, so we have the Indian Navy's commando that received the alert from the UK MTO was the MARCOS. What does MARCOS stand for? It stands for Maritime Commandos, or it is also called as MCF. It is called as the Maritime Command Force. So if you see, MARCOS was the Indian Navy's commando that carried out the successful evacuation of the crew. So we can see the effective involvement of MARCOS in a number of anti-terror activities or counter-terror operations by the Indian Navy, like the 26/11 attack, the 2008 Taj Hotel attack, and was also involved in number of operations like Operation Cactus, Operation Leech, and Operation Pavan. So what is Operation Cactus? Operation Cactus was Indian Navy's contribution in order to destabilize the military coup in Maldives in 1988. Next one is Operation Leech. This was nothing but countering Burmese rebellion group in Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and followed by Operation Pavan, where the Indian Navy occupied the Jaffna Peninsula, which was in control of LTTE, that is nothing but Liberation Tiger of Tamil Eelam. So here we understood what the major issue is about, what was the hijacking is about. We had received the major alert from UK Maritime Trade Operations regarding the hijacking and the incident, to which our commando team MARCOS had actually involved, and we have seen its effective involvement in earlier counter-terror activities in the maritime domain. So moving forward, now let us look into India's maritime security paradigm. As all of us know, if you look at the map, we will know that India is strategically located with the Indian Ocean in the south, the Arabian Sea towards the west, and the Bay of Bengal towards the east. Also, it is a pivotal region or acts as a pivot for trade between the western region and the eastern region. Also, it is complemented by a long coastline of around 7,500 kilometers, which is inclusive of Lakshadweep as well as Andaman and Nicobar, and also has the 18th largest exclusive economic zone. This is what we call it as EEZ. Now let us look into India's maritime security. So the strategic location is India's central location in the Indian Ocean makes it a connecting point between the east as well as the west. And also it has a very extensive maritime territory where it has a long coastline of around 7,517 kilometers, along with an exclusive economic zone of 2.3 million square kilometers. Now let us understand the concept of exclusive economic zone, which was given by UNCLOS. UNCLOS is nothing but United Nations Convention on the Laws of Seas, and this describes EEZ as the region of ocean extending from the shoreline to 12 nautical miles into the Ocean. So UNCLOS actually defines EEZ as the region of ocean that extends from the shoreline to 12 nautical miles into the ocean. So basically, if you see, this will be the EEZ of India. So in this particular region, the coastal state can explore and can exploit the resources and also should conserve and manage both the living and the non-living resources. So in this particular width, that is of 12 nautical miles, or the area that covers a particular state's exclusive economic zone, the state actually has, that is the coastal state, has the right to explore as well as exploit the resources. At the same time, they are responsible for conserving and managing both the living and the non-living resources in this particular region. So moving forward, let us look at the significance of maritime security for India. So why is maritime security important for India? First thing is that, as we all know, India actually is the second in fish production globally. So in order to enhance this and to surpass, so the first is China. In order to surpass China, our maritime security is very important. And also, there are vast deposits of polymetallic nodules which are present in the Indian Ocean. So in order to explore the same, we need a good and efficient maritime security. Followed by this is maritime transportation. That is, maritime transportation accounts over 70% of value and 95% of volume of international trade. Following that is the energy resources. As we know that 40% of the world's offshore oil production actually takes place in the Indian Ocean. So this is why maritime security and a peaceful maritime domain is very important. Also, it is a vital source for liquefied natural gas. Moving forward, India, being located at a very geographically strategic location, has a geographical advantage present at the center of the Indian Ocean. Moving forward, that is, the sea lanes of communication are always critical for global trade and energy security, and this is also a reason why maritime security is very important. The last one is the Indian diaspora. There is a lot of exchange of goods and cultural ties that the nations in the Indian Ocean region actually share among each other, and so this is very important. And safety and security of the Indian diaspora in these regions actually requires a security framework, because of which we actually focus on our maritime security. So now let us look at the major threats in India's maritime domain. So let's break this up into two. First is the traditional threats and the non-traditional threats. Traditional threats include piracy, maritime terrorism, state and non-state actors, whereas non-traditional threats include unregulated fishing, environmental degradation, and organized crime. So let us take that up one by one. First is piracy. Piracy, the best example is we actually listen about or hear about a lot of, how the groups actually attacking the Red Sea region. So there's a lot of disruption of global trade. So that is also one of the threat of maritime domain. And in India's context, we saw the recent Somalian hijacking. So these are the piracy threats in the Indian maritime domain. The second one is maritime terrorism. Here the best example is the 26/11 attack, which was a coordinated terrorist attack of the groups of Lashkar-e-Toiba, where the group has actually entered into the city of Mumbai through the Arabian Sea. So this is the best example of maritime terrorism. So the next one is the state and the non-state actors. So this point actually explains how the differences between two different countries actually offers maritime domain as a platform in order to carry out, war activities. For example, during the India-Pakistan war in 1971, the Indian Navy actually launched Operation Trident in Karachi. This is a port city in Pakistan. So this is an example. Now let us move on to the non-traditional threats. First one is organized crime. Organized crime actually includes what? It has drug trafficking. It has human trafficking. It has arms smuggling. And all this will actually distort the regional stability. Moving on, next is the environmental degradation. For example, you have the recent Ennore oil spills. This will actually cause a threat to the marine ecosystem, especially the fish. As I told you that we are the second producers of fish globally, only after China. The next one is IUU. This is nothing but unregulated fishing. This costs India around $3.4 billion every year of loss and also leads to depletion of marine ecosystem, especially the fishes. Okay, so moving on, let's look at the challenges in India's maritime framework. The first one is there are a lot of overlapping jurisdictions, that is the coordination between different security forces like the Navy, Coast Guard are all not well demarcated. So that is why there is an overlapping jurisdiction where, let's actually look at this. The coordination challenges among the Navy, Coast Guard and State Coastal Police. This actually leads to jurisdictional overlaps. Moving forward, we have resource constraint. There is limited availability of naval vessels, aircraft and surveillance technology. So this actually restricts the coverage and security of a wider maritime area. Moving on, there are infrastructural lapses, that is lack of infrastructure like surveillance radars and naval bases are there, which will limit the capacity or the capability for surveillance and rapid response in case of any hijacking or any kind of piracy and insurgency. Moving on are the technological gaps. So there is need for advanced surveillance technologies and we do not have advanced surveillance technology. One thing is because of the high costs which are associated with satellite-based monitoring and coastal radars. So moving forward, what is the way forward in order to enhance or plug the gaps in India's maritime security? Let us actually see. So there is a 5-point framework on maritime security which has been put forth by the United Nations Security Council. And this 5-point framework includes free trade without barriers, settlement of maritime dispute, responsible maritime connectivity, need for collectively combating maritime threats. Finally, preserving maritime environment and resources. So the 5-point framework that has been established by the UNSC include free maritime trade without barriers, settlement of maritime dispute, responsible maritime connectivity, need for collective combating in times of any kind of maritime threats, and finally preserving the maritime environment and resources. What are the other methods that can be involved here? The next one is policy making. The maritime security should be an integral part of India's foreign policy. That is, we need a very well-defined policy should be there for maritime security. The next one is modernization of Navy through technological advances has to be done. The next article that we will be discussing about is drug war. This actually talks about a recent report released by the Indian government on antimicrobial drug resistance. So this particular topic becomes relevant from GS Paper 3 Science and Technology and Awareness in the Field of Biotechnology. So here we'll be discussing about antimicrobial resistance and its impact on public health. So moving ahead, we have a previous year question in 2019 which actually asked about the occurrence of multi-drug resistant and microbial pathogens in India. So here the MDR as well as any kind of antimicrobial resistance actually becomes important for the examination. Moving forward, let us see. Recently, the government of India had released a report on antimicrobial drug resistance based on its large-scale and multicentric study on the use of medicines. So now let us look into what is AMR, what causes AMR, what is the impact of AMR, what does the National Center for Disease Control state or observe about AMR, what are some of the measures taken by the Indian government, and what are some of the global initiatives. So what is antimicrobial resistance? Antimicrobial resistance is a process by which the pathogens like the bacteria, fungi as well as virus undergo a change in the structure by means of genetic mutation that makes them resistant towards the antibiotics or the medicines or drugs. So this actually makes treating the diseases caused by these pathogens very difficult. So now let us look into what is it. So AMR, it occurs when bacteria, virus, fungi and the parasites, they change over time by means of genetic mutations and they no longer respond to medications or medicines, thereby making the infections harder to treat, and this increases the risk of diseases to spread, and this further leads to severe health impact as well as finally death. The microorganisms that actually undergo this particular change to gain resistance are called as superbugs. Moving forward, now let us look into some of the causes of this antimicrobial resistance. The first one, we need to understand that antimicrobial resistance is a very natural and an organic process. However, this is being accelerated by us humans due to the overuse and the misuse of certain antibiotics. Let us see. AMR is a natural process that happens over time through genetic changes in the pathogens, as we saw. And this emergence is spread and it's accelerated by the human activity, mainly by the misuse and the overuse of the antimicrobials to treat or prevent the infections in the human beings, animals or plants. Moving forward, there is lack of awareness among the public that is intensifying the use of the antibiotics, thereby resulting in AMR. And now let us look into certain impacts of AMR. As we already discussed, it is going to make the treatment of diseases very difficult. It is going to cause a lot of, or it's going to hamper the surgical procedures or any kind of chemotherapy in cancer patients difficult because all these processes involve the antibiotics. So if the bacteria is actually resistant to the antibiotics, it actually makes it very difficult, and here the cost of your healthcare also increases. So let us see. The first one is it makes the infections harder to treat. As I told you, it makes the medical procedures such as surgery, C-sections, cancer, chemotherapy and organ transplantation riskier. Moreover, it impacts the health of animals and plants. That is, this antimicrobial resistance is not only restricted to human beings but also to animals. For example, we have MDR salmonella, which is a multi-drug resistant bacteria, and this causes death in poultry. So thereby this actually threatens the food security situation of the country. The next one is that it also has significant costs for both the health systems and the national economies overall, because the AMR creates the need for more expensive and intensive care. Okay. So moving on, let us see what does the report by the National Center for Disease Control have to say on the persisting AMR. It observed that there was a use of antibiotics which were not recommended by the World Health Organization. It also noted that more than 50% of the antibiotics prescribed had the potential cause of AMR. The next one is over 70% of the patients in the tertiary care hospitals across different states and the UTs, they were prescribed antibiotics, and also a significant percentage, that is 71.9%, with around 4.6 patients were getting 4 or more antibiotics per day. Also, there was actually the practice of polypharmacy. That is, here we use multiple drugs to treat one single condition. This was also there in all the institutions, that is the healthcare institutions across India. And finally, India has been referred to as the AMR capital of the world. Now moving on to certain measures that have been taken by the Indian government in order to treat or to protect or prevent this antimicrobial resistance. Now let us actually look into certain measures taken by India in order to control or prevent the AMR. The first one is the Red Line Awareness Campaign by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. This campaign is nothing but, here you urge people to not use medicines marked with red vertical lines without the prescription of the doctor. Followed by this, we have the National Program on AMR Containment. This was launched during the 12th 5-year plan, that is 2012 to 2017, and here it established labs for AMR surveillance in state medical colleges. Followed by this, we have the National Action Plan on Antimicrobial Resistance, which is nothing but it was launched in 2017 with the help of various stakeholders and departments. And then we have the Delhi Declaration on AMR, which is nothing but it was a ministerial consensus which was signed, where pledge to support AMR was adopted. And in line of the NAP AMR as well as the Delhi Declaration, we have the states of Kerala, Madhya Pradesh and Delhi launching their respective plans. Followed by this, we had AMR Surveillance Network launched in 2013, which actually tracks the pattern and trends in AMR across different regions of India. So followed by this, we have the AMR research as well as the international collaboration as well. Now let us move into some of the global initiatives that have been adopted. The first one is the Global Action Plan on AMR, which was adopted during the 2015 World Health Assembly in order to implement National Action Plan with a One Health approach in order to tackle AMR. The next one is WHO worked closely with FAO, the UNEP as well as the World Organization for Animal Health, which is called as the quadripartite, where 4 organizations have come together in order to take the necessary steps in order to protect or in order to treat this AMR. Followed by this, we have the AWARE campaign, that is Access, Watch and Reserve, where it aims to improve the appropriate treatment and reduce the inappropriate use of the antibiotics. WHO has developed the AWARE classification of the antibiotics. This is a point to note here. Next is that we have the World AMR Awareness Week, which has been observed from 18th to 24th of November every year in order to raise a global awareness regarding the understanding and the best practices among the public in order to deal with the increasing antimicrobial resistance across the world. And the last one is the Global Antimicrobial Resistance and Use Surveillance Approach, that is GLASS, which was launched by the WHO in 2015 in order to fill the knowledge gaps and inform all the strategies to the different stakeholders regarding the containment of AMR. Now let us look at some of the steps that has to be taken in order to put an end to this AMR or at least to contain it to a significant level. The first one is the role of doctors. So doctors should advocate for rational prescription of antibiotics, and also they have to recommend the control of drug use in animal and plant growth promotion. Next one, there has to be a strict regulation, that is there has to be very strict surveillance of AMR and the antimicrobial consumption or the use, as we told that it is accelerated by the human misuse and overuse of the antimicrobials. Followed by that, there is importance of government action. We saw few of the measures taken by the Indian government and also global initiatives by the WHO. And followed by that, the patients should be aware from their part. And finally, equitable access. There is an urgent need for measures to ensure equitable access to new and existing vacancies, diagnostics, and medicines. The next news that we will be discussing about is 5 of 6 accused in Parliament breach case give nod to undergo polygraph test. So here we are aware of the recent security breach in the Lok Sabha, following which the Delhi police have invoked various provisions of the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act as well as the provisions of the Indian Penal Code on the people responsible for the same. And the recent follow up of the news is that 5 of the 6 accused have given a nod in front of the court for the polygraph test. So, here we'll be discussing about what is the polygraph test, what is the method which is actually used in the polygraph test, the legality of the test, and hence this topic becomes relevant from UPSC GS paper 2, fundamental rights, judiciary, transparency, and accountability. Moving forward, we have a previous year question. So, any kind of case that actually affects or is violative of the fundamental rights or anything that deals with the human rights, we have organizations like the National Human Rights Commission coming into picture. So, these bodies, that is the constitutional and statutory bodies, become important from the exam point of view. And that is why here there has been a previous year question in 2014 which actually asks about the effective role that is played by the NHRC and how it can be effective in complementing judiciary and other institutions in promoting and safeguarding the human rights standards. Now moving ahead, the news is that, as we discussed, 5 of the 6 people arrested by the Delhi police in connection with the recent security breach in the parliament have given their consent before a court in order to undergo a polygraph test. So now let us understand what is a polygraph test. A polygraph test is nothing but a polygraph is a lie detector, which is an instrument utilized by the law enforcement agencies in order to record the physiological indices or physiological parameters such as the blood pressure, the heart rate, the pulse rate, then the sweat rate, etc. So if you can see, it is commonly referred to as a lie detector, an instrument utilized by the law enforcement agencies to record the physiological parameters such as the blood pressure, the respiratory rate, the sweat, that is the perspiration, and the pulse when a suspect is asked a series of questions. So what is the underlying principle used in this method is that it produces the differences between the deceptive and non-deceptive answers. Okay, so it records the distinctive physiological responses that can be differentiated from non-deceptive answers. But here, one limitation of the polygraph test is that it is not foolproof. That is, the accuracy is only about 75%. And in case if the accused is an expert liar, okay, and has a good control on his emotions, then this particular test is of no use. So, an expert liar is what we refer to as a pathological liar. So in this case, what happens is you cannot follow or you cannot derive at a distinctive physiological responses that you cannot differentiate. Okay. So moving forward, how is this particular test conducted? So as you can see in this picture, the person who's undertaking a test will have 4 to 6 sensors actually attached to his or her body, and these sensors record the physiological parameters on a sheet of paper, that is the graph. So let us look into it. So the person undergoing the test will be attached with 4 to 6 sensors on his or her body. And in the polygraph machine, the signals from these sensors are recorded on a single strip of moving paper, which is referred to as the graph. And this particular graph records the following parameters like the person's blood pressure, the pulse, the person's perspiration, that is nothing but the sweat level, the person's breathing rate, and the movements of the arms and the legs. And throughout the process of questioning, each of the person's signals is recorded on the moving paper. Now what happens is that we have a polygraph examiner who checks whether the vital signs have changed significantly on any question, and this is how they actually detect that you are potentially lying regarding a particular question. For example, a faster heart rate, a higher blood pressure, and increased sweating or perspiration, this indicate that the person is lying. So here we need to understand the difference between a polygraph test and a narco test. A polygraph test, it involves the external testing of physiological parameters, but a narco test is the usage of drug, essentially sodium thiopental, which is also called as the truth serum. Why is it called the truth serum? This particular drug, which is also used as a short-term anesthetic during surgery of a patient, is injected into an accused, where it takes the person to a sedative or a hypnotic condition. So this condition arrests the person's capacity to imagine. So here the imagination is neutralized. That is, you cannot think beyond a limit to lie. So that is what it is done over here. So ultimately, the person will divulge only the information that is true. So this is actually a narco test. Now let us look into the legality of the polygraph test in India. So here, what does Article 20 Clause 3 and Article 21 actually say about this particular test? So a polygraph or a lie detector test against the will of the person is considered to be an infringement of Article 20 Clause 3 of the Constitution. So Article 20 Clause 3 provides the provision of self-incrimination. What does it talk about? It says that no person accused of any particular offense shall be compelled to be a witness against himself. So this is called as self-incrimination. Also, in many cases, the judiciary has criticized the polygraph test as it is considered to be a torture to the mental peace that is violating the right to life under Article 21 of the Constitution, that is essentially the right to privacy. Moving on, let us look into the provisions of the Indians Evidence Act of 1872. Here we will see sections 45 and 45A of the Indian Evidence Act says that the court can take the opinion from an expert, and this is essentially considered to be an expert opinion and not any kind of a confession or a witness made against the accused. Okay. So here if we see, it says that the court can take the opinion from an expert in any field which is required to the case, and polygraph test cannot be considered as an evidence, but the court can consider it as an expert opinion. And also, the polygraph test can help in moving forward the investigation for the police officials. Moving forward, let us look into what the National Human Rights Commission actually has told about it and what are the guidelines which were framed. So, in the year 2000, the National Human Rights Commission has issued certain guidelines regarding the administration of this particular polygraph test that is not violative of Article 21, that is right to privacy of the Indian Constitution, and currently we actually involve only this method where you conduct the polygraph test only in case of heinous crime and in any condition that is detrimental to the national security. So what does the guideline actually say? The lie detector or polygraph test should be administered only with the consent of the subject, that is the person who is accused. Also, the person should be informed about the knowledge of the test and what will be the potential implications of that particular test through the police or either the lawyer. Also, the consent given by the subject must be recorded before a judicial magistrate. Moreover, the words spoken by the person during the test are just the statements made to the police, and these are not essentially confessions. So now let us look into few of the judicial pronouncements, that is on what the judiciary had to say against conducting these kind of neuroscientific investigative methods like either the polygraph test or the narco test. Okay. So the court ruled that any use of such neuroscientific methods which are constituted under compulsion, it violated the person's right against self-incrimination under Article 20 Clause 3 and the right to life and personal liberty under Article 21 of the Constitution. Moving forward, in D.K. Basu versus the State of West Bengal case 1997, the Supreme Court ruled that involuntary administration of such narcos as well as the polygraph test will amount to cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment in the context of Article 21 or right to life and liberty. The next news that we will be discussing about is ISRO tests fuel cell to potentially power space missions. So this particular article is about ISRO having successfully tested a fuel cell technology in order to power the space missions. So here, this particular topic becomes important for prelims, that is under general science, and mains under paper 3 space technology. So here we'll be discussing about the fuel cells, the different types and the mechanisms used in the fuel cells to produce electric energy. So moving forward, we have a previous year question with reference to that of the fuel cells in which hydrogen-rich fuel cell and oxygen are used to generate electricity. Consider the following statements. So here, the fuel cells become an important topic of discussion. So moving forward, as I told you, ISRO has achieved a significant milestone with the successful demonstration of a fuel cell using hydrogen and oxygen. So this particular technology is known as polymer electrolyte membrane fuel cell technology. Now let us understand why is the electricity or the electric current which is actually released by the fuel cell is important. So what happens is whenever a rocket with that of a payload, so this is the payload that a rocket carries, which is nothing but the satellites. And here are the stages of fuels like the solid, liquid or the cryogenic fuels which are giving propulsion, for the system to be launched into the atmosphere. So whenever the rocket is launched into the atmosphere, what happens is these stages of the fuels actually gets detached after thrusting this particular payload into the respective orbits, whether it is the low Earth orbit or the geosynchronous or the geostationary orbits. So now, for this payload or the satellite to carry out its mission objectives, it actually needs any kind of propulsion. This is provided by the fuel cell. And this fuel cell is used to generate electricity, which will be environment friendly as well as cost productive or cost effective. Moving ahead, let us see about the fuel cell mechanism. So we have taken an example of an hydrogen cell here. So this is a hydrogen cell, this is the anode and this is the cathode. The anode is the negative electrode and the cathode is the positive electrode. So as this is the hydrogen cell, we have the hydrogen which is the fuel. It actually gets oxidized at the negative electrode and this oxidization leads to the releasing of the electrons which carry the negative charge. So the electrons which carry the negative charge gets attracted towards the cathode, which is the positive electrode, where the oxidizing agent, which is nothing but the O2, that is oxygen, actually attracts these electrons. So when there is a transfer of electrons from the anode to the cathode, there is generation of electric current or electricity. So this is how this particular energy is used for propelling these satellites in space. So now let us look. The fuel cells are responsible for converting the chemical energy directly into the electrical energy through controlled reactions between a fuel, that is hydrogen, and the oxidizing agent, that is the oxygen. Moving forward, we look at the basic components of the cell as we discussed. The anode is the negative electrode where the hydrogen is oxidized, releasing the electrons. And the cathode is the positive electrode where the oxidizing agent, that is the oxygen, accepts the electrons and this facilitates reduction reaction. And here you have the electrolyte which is present at the center, which is nothing but it separates the anode and the cathode, and this allows only the ions to pass and this facilitates the electron movement. Moving ahead, there is energy flow, as I told you, or energy creation, that is electrons released at the anode create the electric current by traveling through an external circuit in the cathode. So here you will have the electric current generation. So why is this fuel cell technology actually adopted or preferred? Because the byproducts are environment friendly. That is, here the byproducts will be water as well as heat, which can be used or repurposed for other purposes. Like for example, Byproducts include water and heat, and in the hydrogen fuel cells, water is a harmless byproduct and heat can be utilized for various other applications. Moving forward, let us look at the type of fuel cells. The first one is proton exchange membrane fuel cells, and these are commonly used in transportation and portable applications. The next one is the solid oxide fuel cells, and this actually operate at high temperatures, and hence these are suitable for stationary power generation, followed by molten carbonate fuel cells, which are used for large scale power generation purposes. Now moving on to the applications of fuel cells. The first application is, as we saw, it is used for space exploration because they power spacecraft and satellites with high energy density and reliability. This will ensure continuous operation in space. The next one is transportation. These actually provide a clean alternative. As I told you, the byproducts are water as well as heat. So, because of this clean alternative, they result in zero emission transportation and they reduce the environmental impact of internal combustion engines. Moreover, there is stationary power generation. That is, they offer continuous and reliable power for residential and industrial applications, and this will enable efficient and sustainable energy production. Followed by this is it is used for backup power systems. That is, they serve as backup power sources for critical infrastructures during grid outages so that there is uninterrupted operation and emergency power supplies. The next one is marine applications. That is, it is mainly used for marine vessels because it is eco-friendly and it acts as efficient power solutions in order to reduce the environmental impact that is caused by other sources of energy. Moving forward, let us look at some of the advantages of fuel cells. The first one, as we told, it is the higher efficiency because fuel cells actually have efficiencies exceeding 60%. Okay, so they outperform the traditional combustion based sources. The next one is low emissions that we already saw. That is, it's environmental friendly and only water vapor is produced as a byproduct. Next one is quiet operation. Okay, that is, its operation is very silent, so it makes it ideal for noise sensitive environments like the residential areas, etc. And moving on, it has a longer lifespan. The last one is that modularity and scalability. That is, the flexibility of the fuel cells makes them adaptable to diverse applications because it ranges from individual devices to large-scale energy grids. Now let us discuss few of the disadvantages of fuel cells. First one is the high cost of installation. Next is that the lifetime of cells is less. Next one, we do not have the sufficient infrastructure for distributing hydrogen, and there is high cost of pure hydrogen, and also it requires large area or volume of gas storage. So these are the advantages and the disadvantages of using the fuel cells. So the next news that we will be discussing will be HC permits widow to terminate pregnancy, where the High Court has recently permitted a widowed woman to abort. The Delhi High Court has recently allowed a pregnant woman to adopt a fetus despite crossing a period of 24-week limit. So now let us look into the article. This is important from GS Paper 1, Indian Society, and GS Paper 2, Social Justice. And here we'll be discussing about the abortion laws and the MTP Act, which is Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act, as well as the reproductive rights of women. So moving ahead, there was a previous year question in 2016 which had asked about the correct statement regarding the Maternity Benefit Amendment Act. So any act and regulation or convention regarding the vulnerable sections of the society like children, women or elderly population become important for the examination. So the Delhi High Court has recently permitted the abortion to a widowed mother despite crossing a period of 24 weeks limit. And as we know, only under certain exceptional circumstances, the MTP, that is the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Amendment Act of 2021, allows for abortion beyond 24 weeks. So let's move ahead. The recent Delhi High Court judgment is actually based on the previous or the earlier 2022 Supreme Court judgment, which actually stated that it is the prerogative of a woman to evaluate her life and make decisions based on her changed material circumstances. It also stated that the right to reproductive choice also includes the right not to procreate. Moving forward, now let us understand the provisions of the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Amendment Act of 2021. This allows for medical termination of pregnancy according to 3 stages. Under stage 1, it allows medical termination up to period of 20 weeks where the advice of the doctor is sufficient. That is, advice from one doctor is sufficient. Here it's very important. Stage 2 is that there can be medical termination of pregnancy from 20 to 24 weeks period, and the consensus from 2 registered medical practitioners is important, but only under special cases the abortion is actually allowed as per section 3B of this particular act. Now let us look into certain special cases under 3B that deals with survivors of sexual assault or rape or incest. If the person is a minor, if there is a change in the marital status during the ongoing pregnancy, if the woman is of unsound mind, and if there is a condition of fetal malformation that causes substantial risk to the health of the mother, and women with physical disabilities with a major disability in terms of criteria that are laid down by the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016. So these are the various special conditions under which the MTP Act actually allows the abortion of the fetus. Moving forward is the stage 3. The stage 3 talks about medical termination of pregnancy beyond 24 weeks, and here a medical board must be set up in approved facilities, and it may allow or it may deny the medical termination only if there is substantial fetal abnormality. Moving forward, let us look at certain significance of this act. First is that it has increased the gestational period from 20 weeks that was earlier to 24 weeks of gestation if certain conditions are met. The second point is the opinion for termination. That is, for pregnancies up to 20 weeks, the opinion of one doctor is required, whereas for 20 to 24 weeks, the opinion of 2 doctors is needed. Followed by this is a criteria of failure of contraception. This particular act allows for abortion in cases of contraceptive failure irrespective of your marital status, and the previous version of the act only considered contraceptive failure as a valid reason for abortion for a married woman. The next one is increased access and autonomy. So the act actually seeks to reduce the barriers for women, especially in the early stages of pregnancy. Now let us solve certain prelims and mains practice questions. The first question reads, consider the following statements regarding the advantage of fuel cells. Fuel cells demonstrate efficiencies exceeding 60%. Yes, this is correct. Hydrogen fuel cells, a type of cell, emit only water vapor during electricity generation. Yes, this is correct. Fuel cells operate with noticeable noise. No, this is wrong. The fourth statement reads, fuel cells generally have shorter operational lifespans compared to traditional batteries. This is also wrong. So going by the statements, only 2 options are correct. So answer becomes B. The second question is, consider the following statements. In the Indian law, the results of polygraph test cannot be considered as confessions. Yes, this is correct. It cannot be taken as witness, evidence or confessions. Next one is, conducting polygraph test without the consent violates the person's fundamental rights. Yes, according to Article 20, Clause 3 and 21, this is correct. Right to remain silent is a fundamental right under Article 20. Yes, this is correct. And final statement is, polygraph test is not foolproof. Yes, it may lead to errors because it is only 75% accurate. So going by the statements, all the above, so the answer will be option D. Moving ahead, we have question number 3, talking about the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Amendment Act 2021. It does not allow pregnant women for abortion beyond 24 weeks. No, this is wrong because it allows. The second statement is, until 24 weeks of gestation period, a woman has the right to terminate the pregnancy without any preconditions. No, this is wrong. There are certain preconditions according to section 3B of the Act. Following this, failure of contraceptive 2 is a ground for seeking termination. So this is correct. So going by the statements, answer A, that is only 1 is correct. Question number 4. Consider the following statements regarding antimicrobial resistance. It is a natural process that happens over time through genetic changes. This is correct. Ministry of Health and Family Welfare has developed the aware classification of antibiotics. No, this is wrong. This was by WHO. So, which of the above statements are correct? Only one is correct. So, the answer is A. The next one is question number 5. Match the following of the Indian military operations with the respective descriptions. So, here we can see that Operation Cactus is regarding the thwarting group of military coup in the Maldives, capturing the mercenaries. Then Operation Leeds matches the arrest of Burmese rebels for gun running in the Andaman Islands. And Operation Pavan is the control of Jaffna Peninsula from the NTT. So going by the options, the answer is A. Moving on to the mains practice question. The question reads, what is AMR? Critically evaluate the impacts of antibiotics on health and measures to overcome its negative effects. So now the approach for the answer will be, in the introduction we will discuss about what is antimicrobials and what is antimicrobial resistance. Following that, in the body we'll discuss about the causes as well as the impacts of antimicrobial resistance. Then we'll also discuss or quote the statistics or the observations made by the WHO report as well as the National Center for Disease Control on what they had to talk about the AMR. And also we can discuss the various measures taken by India as well as some of the global initiatives like GLASS as well as aware of the WHO. In the conclusion part or the way forward, we can talk about a holistic approach including all the stakeholders by following One Health method. That's all for the daily news analysis. For regular updates, please like, share and subscribe to Narayana IAS Academy YouTube channel. Thank you.